The woman who answered the door when I knocked had tears in her eyes. She clutched her housecoat tighter around herself and took me in, looking me up and down. "Miss Burton, I'm Agent Barnes. May I come in, please?" She regarded me through the glass, staring coldly at my face. "They said you'd be coming. You're from the FBI? Some sort of special unit?" "That's right, ma'am," I said, pulling on my ID badge and showing it to her. After examining it for a while, she turned the handle, pausing to take a quick look. Hopefully look around the neighborhood before finally holding the creaking screen door open for me. I stepped up the wooden staircase and entered the house. The home was well kept. Old but comfortable furnishings, walls covered in framed photos showing barbecues and family gatherings, weddings, birthday parties. It looked like a peaceful place, not an abusive household or neglected one, I thought to myself. I took out my notepad and scribbled something illegible. "I'm here to follow up on the case involving your son, Brian. Do you mind if we sit down to talk for a few minutes?" She showed me into the living room and I took a seat on the couch. "Can I get you anything, Agent?" "Barnes? No. I'm fine, thank you, though." Instead of sitting down opposite me, she chose to remain standing, making me feel oddly nervous. I tried to ignore the situation, but it did throw me off slightly. Most people sit down when you do, especially when they're the host. "What exactly can I do for you?" "Well, I'm hoping to ask you a few questions about your son's disappearance. I understand that he went missing from his bedroom late one night and there was no signs of forced entry. The doors were still locked in the morning when you woke up, is that right?" She nodded slowly. "And this despite the fact that he didn't have a key and none were missing from the home." She stood with her arms crossed, not saying anything. "Was there a question in there somewhere, Agent Barnes?" I waited for a beat. This wasn't how I expected it to go. Already I felt like my entire preconception of the case was wrong. My theories were immediately forgotten and I began to examine the whole situation with fresh eyes as I sat there looking into the woman's unreadable face. I suppose my question is, how did he go missing? Seems impossible, unless there's something that you aren't telling us, a door left open, a window, a neighbor with a copy of your keys, something. You have to try to remember. "You're singing the same old song that the detective was singing. Nobody else had a key. None of the windows or the doors were unlocked. I'm sure about that." "And you're sure he didn't sneak out after dinner to play with friends? No one would blame you if that was the case. Kids that age, they'll go out to the forest, they'll run around, they'll get in trouble. You're sure he was in his room that night when you went to bed?" "I'm sure. I tucked him in myself. I'm not a drunk or a druggie, Agent Barnes. I'm not a neglectful mother either. I didn't forget seeing my son in bed that night, just like I didn't forget to lock up." This was going nowhere, I could already tell. We were off to a bad start. I had a feeling that she would sense my newfound hesitancy and uncertainty. So I put my notepad away. I thought for a few seconds what direction to take. I had to improvise. "Can you show me his room? I'd like to see it if I could." Her face showed no change of expression at the request. She just held her hand out, inviting me towards the back of the house. I followed her as she led me down a hallway with creaking wooden floors. "Do you have children, Agent Barnes?" "Yeah, a son." "How old is he, if you don't mind me asking?" 11, actually. Same as your Brian." "Good. Now imagine for a second what it would feel like if you had him taken from you in the night, despite doing everything possible to stop something like that from ever happening." I hate to think of it. That's a parent's worst nightmare. "Here's his bedroom," she said, opening a door at the end of the hall on the left. "It's just as he left it. I didn't change a thing." The room was painted a pale blue shade, and there was a small bed in the corner, a desk with a computer sitting atop of it, a gaming console, a small television on the far end with a beanbag chair in front of it. There were no signs of violence or disarray. Nothing looked out of place or broken. A few items of clothing and toys were scattered here and there, but overall it looked cleaner than my own son's room. Was there anything missing? Any of his belongings, clothes, toothbrush, phone? Brian doesn't have a phone. He kept begging me for one, but I told him he wasn't old enough. She broke off suddenly, her face screwing up into a grimace of sorrow. If I'd let him have a damn cell phone, maybe they could have traced it. I put a comforting hand on her shoulder and she let me do that, at least, without pulling away. Even if you had, he wouldn't have had it on him while he was sleeping. You can't blame yourself for that, I told her, feeling suddenly more and more on her side. And just so you know, my son doesn't have a cell phone either, I told her. I told him the same thing. The woman bit her lip, hugging herself tighter. She turned her eyes up to the ceiling, trying to dry the tears within them, as if she couldn't bear the thought of weeping 1 minute longer. Do you think Brian could have made a copy of your key, maybe without your knowledge? That just maybe he could have snuck out in the night and locked up afterwards? She shook her head rapidly. He's 11. And no, I told the officers he isn't like that. He's a good boy. I looked over to see the closet in the corner of the room was now hanging open, and just ever so slightly. But I distinctly remembered it being closed when I came into the room. Inside, it looked pitch black. For some reason, I was drawn towards that darkness, and I began to walk across the room towards the closet door. What I was looking for within that darkness, I wasn't sure, but it seemed important that I check inside. Brian told me something the night before he disappeared. He said there was a monster in his closet. I stopped dead in my tracks. And most children of 11 years old had grown out of seeing monsters in the shadows, hadn't they? At least my son had. He had grown out of that phase a long time ago, she said, as if reading my thoughts. But then, all of a sudden, that night, he told me there was a monster hiding in his closet, and he... You what? He actually wet the bed. He hadn't done that in a long time. I see. And so he came out here, he told you all that, and then what happened? I went back to his room with him right away. I turned the lights on, I opened the closet to show him there was nothing inside, just his clothes and a few old shoes, but he still wasn't convinced. He said the monster was very good at hiding, that it pretends to be shadows. Glancing back in the open closet door again, I started moving towards it once more, this time with my legs feeling more wobbly like jello. He washed up, and I changed his sheets, and he went back to bed. Brian wanted to stay up with me and watch television after that. He didn't want to go back to his room, but I made him go. What time was this around? 2 o'clock in the morning, and then he had to get up for school the next day, she said, then broke off sobbing once again. Opening the closet door, I peered inside. The darkness permeated the whole space like a thick, oily cloud of smoke. Far more black and terrifying than it should have been. As if the darkness were a living thing camouflaging itself there, pretending to be just a closet, just like the missing boy had claimed. I shook my head, trying to clear these thoughts from my mind, but they persisted. Can you turn the light on any brighter than that? No, it's all the way up. Stupid light bulbs seem to get dimmer every day, even after I replaced it. I have to get an electrician over here one of these days. I pulled out my flashlight. I shone it into the dark space. The oily blackness retreated almost reluctantly, as if in a delayed reaction that shouldn't have been possible. I blinked my eyes twice, trying to decide if I was seeing things. My heart was suddenly hammering, and the palms of my hands were sweaty as I stared at the darkened space in the dim beam of my flashlight. It seemed to be malfunctioning, weak compared to its usual strength. I smacked it a few times and tried to remember when I'd last replaced the batteries. Can you feel that too? She asked from behind me nervously. I wanted to turn around and look at her, but was afraid to leave my back exposed to the darkness. I know it's crazy, but ever since that night, I can't help but feel like maybe he was right. Can you feel it? Something staring at you? She let out a nervous titter, which broke me out of my stunned silence. "No, ma'am," I lied. "Just looks like a regular bedroom closet to me." "You feel like there's something in there looking at you?" "Not just me, at us. It's watching both of us. It's seeing your face, Agent Barnes. I don't think that's a good thing." "What?" "How come you don't want to turn your back on it, Agent Barnes? You do feel it. I know you do. Close the door so it can't stare at us anymore, will you? I don't like that feeling. Not one bit." I pushed it with a shaking hand and felt the satisfying click of it closing. Suddenly, I could breathe again. We both left the room in a hurry, and I excused myself momentarily into the bathroom. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and didn't recognize my own face staring back. There were bags beneath my eyes that hadn't been there before, and my skin looked yellow-gray, sallow and jaundiced. I felt sick to my stomach. Before I could do anything, the nausea overcame me. Getting down on my knees, I retched into the toilet bowl. Pure black bile like molasses poured out of me, sticky and tenacious like tar. It burned like acid as it came up from my stomach, coating my tongue afterwards and tasting oily and terrible. I rinsed out my mouth and flushed the toilet again and again to no avail. I stumbled out of the bedroom, drunk feeling and dizzy, but still wanting to finish my interview. I needed to at least try. She was waiting for me in the kitchen, standing by the sink. I stumbled into the room and I felt it spinning all around me. Clutching my head with both hands, I tried to force myself to see straight. Just a couple more questions," I said, covering my mouth so that she didn't see the black bile coating my tongue. My heart was pounding far too quickly, and I tried to ignore the fact that something was potentially very seriously wrong with me. Still, completely in denial of it at that point. "You don't look well, Agent Barnes. You look gray in the face. Are you all right?" Fine. Now, can you tell me about Brian's father? I understand he passed away several years ago. Did he have any family, close friends?" She shook her head at me, as if none of these questions mattered. And she was right. In a way, they didn't. The interview didn't lead anywhere, and I couldn't focus on anything that she said. Soon I was blackout on the street again. The memory of the end of the interview gone entirely from my mind. It was like I had been on autopilot without realizing it, and I didn't like that feeling, as if someone else had been driving the car and I had been asleep behind the wheel. I had a very strong suspicion that whatever had happened to Brian would not be a solvable crime. And if it was solvable, those findings would not be suitable for an official report. This had redacted written all over it, assuming it even made it up to the chain of command. If I told my superiors what I had just experienced, they wouldn't have believed a word of it. The case had gone cold months before, so I wasn't expected of me to solve it, only to try to lend a hand if I could. Most of the cases ended up remaining unsolved, so it wouldn't require much explanation if I wasn't able to do anything useful. I really didn't feel like I would be able to do anything useful. I had terrible brain fog for the rest of the trip, getting contemptuous looks from the local police detectives whenever I suggested anything that I thought might be useful. Everything had been tried before by the sounds of it, and began to feel as if I had overstayed my welcome. My flight back home was a red-eye. I tried to sleep through it, but found my dreams were plagued by nightmares. I kept dreaming I was a kid again, back in my childhood bedroom. Not only that, but my closet door kept squealing open in the night, creaking loudly, the wood swinging back and forth as if blown by an impossible wind. I stood up on my child legs to go over to it, but found myself frozen with fear, staring at the blackness within the closet. That deep, penetrating darkness which seemed to spread like flooding, overflowing water towards me, and then, as I reached out a trembling hand for the door handle to close it, something else reached out and grabbed my wrist. An ice-cold, gnarled hand, rotten and emaciated. The flesh was pale and bluish-purple, mottled and covered in wounds, seeping and oozing with blood and pus. As I tried desperately to pull away, fighting it with all of my strength, it pulled me deeper into the darkness. I fell in, plunging into the depths of it, suffocating in the dark abyss. And when I woke up, I was screaming, and the airplane had begun to descend. The flight attendants gave me a look which told me my terror was not appreciated. By the time I got home that night, it was already dark and well past Greg's bedtime. My wife was in bed, so I poured myself a drink, sat down on the couch to watch television for a little while, hoping to distract myself from the things I'd seen, and from the dreams I couldn't unsee. I wanted so badly to forget that dream, but it was the only thing I could visualize when I closed my eyes. That rotten corpse hand grabbing hold of my wrist and squeezing. I felt as if I could feel that pain even after I had awoken. That feeling of something tightening around my forearm like a freezing vice. I looked down at my arm to see a handprint there, slowly purple like an old bruise. It was fading like it was old, and yet I hadn't seen it earlier. The hell? What's happening to me, I asked myself, standing up and pacing. There was cold beer in the fridge. Despite the time I went in there, I grabbed the bottle, popped it open, chugged its contents. I felt so thirsty all of a sudden, like I hadn't drank in days, but I didn't want water. The thought of it disgusted me. The bottle was empty, and so I grabbed another and another, draining them both. Soon I was on my fourth, and then it was empty. The rest of the six-pack was gone 2 minutes later, and I belched loud enough to wake the dead after I finished polishing it off. Still thirsty, I went to the cupboard. I pulled out an old, dusty bottle of Gibson's. I drank it straight down, the usual burn of it absent now. Instead, it just felt like heat in my belly afterwards. Suddenly very tired, I stumbled off to bed, but not before peeking into Greg's room to check on him. It was around 3 a.m. by that point. He was fast asleep and snoring, and his closet door was closed tightly. I made sure of that. When we woke up the next morning, Greg was gone. I had locked all the doors and windows, and Greg didn't have his own key. He didn't have a cell phone we could trace either, but I got the feeling that it wouldn't make a difference either way. The police came to investigate and were surprised to hear what I do for a living. They were even more surprised to hear about the case I had just been investigating. Think it might be a copycat? One of the detectives asked innocently. If only it could have been simple. Or maybe the same guy. You might be right, I said, unable to deny their logic. But I knew that wasn't what had happened. Not really. Let's take a look around his room, they said. And I led them down the hallway towards Greg's room, showing them inside. I left it exactly how it was. We didn't touch anything. The closet door swung open an inch, then stopped. It opened an inch wider and stopped again. Does the closet door always do that? The taller detective asked. No. Why don't you take a look? Good evening once again, kids. It's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I want to tell you thank you for watching tonight's video, or for listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. That's available on Spotify, or on Apple Music, or on any other places that you can get podcasts. I'm not entirely sure where people listen to podcasts. If you guys are watching on YouTube, though, I would really appreciate if you click the subscribe button, click that thumbs up button, and hit the bell for me, because that's what we're supposed to say now. We're required by YouTube law. As always, I want to give a big thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon. You guys are the real MVPs, and you allow us to get a whole bunch of custom stories that are only heard here on this channel, on this podcast. So, a very big thank you to Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Stephanie Butler, Bobby Karman, Tristain Pelton, Chase Burnett, Diana Kraus, Maria Walker, Tonya Oran, Paingravy, Inactive Hermit, Austin Johnson, Crazy Kid, MrMarcusBlitz, Aika Limchoc, Dirt Diver 030, Matt Bach, Jabbles Raz, Voiceofsand, Coffee Zombie, Matthew McNeese, ChellyJay, Jeremy H, raltizal, PhycoMel, Nana, TheMorrigan, Nick Weaver, MeltedLake, Tali Sue, SkyMara Ravenswood, William King, Reaper61167, Darth Miver, Micah Ortiz, Satanic Aries, Nessie, Parafa Panda,
BardoHawk764, Lambda M98, Harley, Billy Morrow, Sashi Suzaku, My Body Sounds Like Rice Krispies, Miss Xander, Suji Campbell, Stricken, Azarine Fox, Freddy Krueger, Happy Birthday Jason Wilson, Lisa Cottrell, Caspian, Hades' Nephew, Tater Chip, Acid System, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Cryptic Nightmares, Kiri the Sloth, Tommy Green, Fester's Lampshade, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, Trey Smiles, and Corey Kenshin. And of course, everybody who's down there in the description as well, and everybody who can support on patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta for even $1, I appreciate it greatly, and I'm sure that all the authors that we were able to work with appreciate it too. So, thank you guys so much, thank you for listening, and sweet dreams.